The pain arrived like a bolt of lightning, searing through my chest and splitting my world in two. I gasped, my eyes snapping open to a harsh, sterile white light that made my skull throb with every heartbeat. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The room spun in sickening circles, white walls, the rhythmic beeping of machines, and clear plastic tubes snaking from my arms like vines. I tried to sit up, but my body screamed in protest. It felt as though someone had used a crowbar to pry my ribcage apart. A woman in a white coat appeared by my side, her eyes kind behind wire-rimmed glasses. She introduced herself as Dr. Sterling, my cardiologist. My voice was a hoarse whisper, my throat raw from the intubation. I asked her what happened. She explained that I had undergone emergency triple bypass surgery 2 days prior. My heart had stopped for 47 seconds during the procedure. 47 seconds of being technically dead. The words echoed in my mind like stones dropped into a deep, dark well. Dr. Sterling assured me the surgery was a success, but I would need 2 weeks of hospital recovery, followed by a very slow return to my normal life. I looked around the room. It was January in Phoenix, and the sky outside was a dull, dusty gray. There were no flowers on my bedside table. No cards, no balloons, no sign that anyone even knew I was here. A nurse named Maria checked my IV, her smile warm as she adjusted the flow of my pain medication. Once I was alone again, I reached for my phone. I saw dozens of notifications, news alerts, spam emails, and pharmacy reminders. I scrolled past them, looking for something that mattered. Messages from Margaret. Missed calls from my son, Brandon. But there was nothing. I checked our family group chat. The last message was from weeks ago, Margaret complaining about a store being out of her favorite brand of artisanal butter. Before that, Brandon had asked if I could cover his phone bill again. Not a single word about my surgery. Not one, "How are you, Dad?" I closed my eyes and let the silence of the hospital wash over me. The antiseptic smell triggered memories I had spent years trying to suppress. It really started back in 2020. I was 66 years old, working in the heat of our Scottsdale garden. My chest had tightened so hard I had to grip the fence post to keep from falling. My wife, Margaret, had called from the shade of the porch, iced tea in hand. She told me I was being dramatic and to come inside before I had a stroke. I laughed it off then, telling myself I was as strong as an ox. But the episodes didn't stop. By 2022, the stairs in our house felt like a mountain expedition. Pause on the landing, grip the banister, wait for the hammer in my chest to stop. Margaret would usually be in bed, focused on her reality shows. She'd tell me I was just getting old and should stop doing so many weekend projects. I never told her about the metallic taste in my mouth or how the world would tilt sideways when I stood up too fast. She had her bridge club and her charity galas to worry about. Brandon was worse. At 32, he was still living in our guest suite, floating between consulting gigs that never seemed to pay. When I mentioned feeling tired, he'd just shrug and tell me to see a doctor, then immediately warn me that doctors were expensive and I should try some vitamins first. He was more worried about my medical bills eating into his future inheritance than he was about my survival. The first real attack happened in our kitchen on a Tuesday morning in 2024. I was making coffee when the sledgehammer hit my chest. I slid down to the cold tile, coffee grounds scattering like ash around me. I called for Margaret, but she didn't hear me. She found me 10 minutes later, gasping for air. Her first reaction wasn't to call an ambulance. It was to ask if I had fallen. She told me she had a hair appointment in an hour and asked if I was okay enough to drive myself to the clinic. I drove myself to the ER instead. The doctor there told me my arteries were closing like old, rusted pipes. Without surgery, I had 6 months. With it, I might get another decade. I drove home that day with my hands shaking on the wheel, wondering if I even wanted those 10 years, if I had to spend them with people who barely noticed I was dying. Finally, the morning of my discharge arrived. I packed my small bag with trembling hands. My glasses, a book I never finished, the pajamas that smelled like the hospital laundry. I felt stronger, but the betrayal was a heavy weight in my gut. For 2 weeks, I had fought my way back from death, and for 2 weeks, my family had been silent. I told myself they were just overwhelmed. I decided to send a message to the group chat. I kept it simple. The doctor says I can come home today. I'd love to see everyone. The response was almost instantaneous. Brandon's name popped up first. Call a taxi. I'm right in the middle of a marathon on Netflix. I stared at the screen, reading it over and over. My son couldn't pause a show to pick up his father after heart surgery. Then Margaret's message appeared below his. Stay in the hospital for another month. It's actually so nice and quiet here without you. The phone slipped from my hand and landed on the thin hospital blanket. The words glowed like neon signs, announcing the end of my life as I knew it. It's so good without you. I sat on the edge of the bed as my bag slid to the floor with a dull thud. The phoenix sun streaming through the window felt like a cruel joke. My chest ached, but it wasn't the surgery this time. It was a pain that no scalpel could reach. Nurse Maria came in and saw my face. She picked up the phone, read the messages, and her expression shifted from professional to deeply sorrowful. I'm so sorry, Arthur, she whispered. Families can be complicated. Complicated wasn't the word. The word was finished. I had spent 45 years being a provider, a protector, and a silent partner to people who saw me as nothing more than an ATM and a janitor. I looked at my discharge papers. They contained instructions for meds, for walking, and for recovery. But as I sat there, those papers looked like something else. They looked like an exit strategy. I walked out of the hospital on unsteady legs. I called a taxi, and the driver was a man who seemed to sense my mood. I told him I had just had heart surgery. He looked at me in the mirror and asked if I had anyone waiting for me. I told him I was done being picked up. As we drove through familiar streets of Scottsdale, my mind drifted back through the years. I remembered 1990, when I wanted a motorcycle more than anything. I had saved every penny for 2 years. But Margaret told me it had to go because we needed a new sunroom and a playset for Brandon. I sold it and bought the furniture instead. I remembered 2005, when we were supposed to go to Italy for our silver anniversary. I'd worked double shifts at the firm for a year. Then Brandon got into a private college that offered no financial aid. Margaret told me Italy would always be there, but Brandon's education couldn't wait. The Italy brochures went into the trash, and the money went to tuition. I remembered 2015, when Brandon needed a seed loan for a graphic design business that failed within 3 months because he spent the money on a luxury car and networking dinners. I worked 3 extra years to pay off the debt I'd co-signed for. All those years, Margaret promised me that once Brandon is settled, it'll be our time. But Brandon never settled, and our time never came. The taxi pulled up to my house. The white stucco, the desert landscaping I meticulously maintained every weekend. It should have looked like home. Instead, it looked like a tomb I'd built for myself. I paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk, looking at 45 years of mortgage payments, and yes, dears. I realized the house was just evidence of my own stupidity. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the cool, dark entryway. The house felt foreign. Margaret's shoes were tossed haphazardly on the floor, and Brandon's muddy gym bag was sitting right in the middle of the hall. Mail was piled up, mostly unopened bills and junk. I flipped the light switch in the living room and froze. It looked like a college dorm. Brandon's gaming gear had migrated from his suite and was sprawled across the living room. Empty pizza boxes were stacked on my favorite leather recliner. Energy drink cans formed a small mountain on the coffee table. They hadn't missed me. They had been celebrating my absence. They'd turned the house into a playground. I walked into my private study, the one room I consider my own. It had been turned into a storage locker. Margaret's craft supplies were dumped on my desk, and Brandon's old computer monitors were stacked on my bookshelves, covering the family photos I had carefully arranged. I sat in the one chair that wasn't covered in junk. My heart was thumping, not with the weakness of surgery, but with the cold, hard rhythm of a man who had finally found his limit. I opened the small floor safe in the corner of the room. The combination was Brandon's birthday. How ironic. Inside was my will, sitting in its blue legal folder. I pulled it out and read the words I'd written years ago. To my beloved wife, Margaret, the house and all property. To my son, Brandon, all remaining financial assets. I laughed, and the sound was bitter and hollow. Beloved wife, the woman who wanted me to stay in the hospital so she could have more peace. My son, the 32-year-old boy who couldn't pause a television show for the man who paid for the roof over his head. I pulled up my phone and searched for estate attorneys. I found a man named Samuel Thorne. He had high ratings and a reputation for being thorough. I made an appointment for the next morning. That night, I didn't sleep in the master bedroom. I slept in the small guest room that they hadn't yet managed to fill with trash. I listened to sounds of Brandon shouting at his video games down the hall and Margaret laughing at some show on TV. They didn't even know I was in the house. The next morning, I was at Samuel Thorne's office before he even arrived. His office was grand, overlooking the valley, filled with the smell of old paper and success. Samuel was a man of 60, with silver hair and eyes that saw through everything. I told him my story, the 47 seconds of death, the 2 weeks of silence, the text messages, and the state of my house when I returned. Samuel took notes on a yellow pad, his expression unreadable. Arthur, he said after I finished, this is a significant move. Are you sure this isn't just the pain medication talking? I pulled out my phone and showed him the text messages. Then I showed him the photos I'd taken of my study being used as a closet and the pizza boxes in my recliner. This isn't anger, Samuel, I told him. This is a delayed reaction to 45 years of being a ghost in my own home. I want to leave everything to the Heart Health Alliance. They help families who actually care about each other survive these crises. I want Margaret and Brandon to get nothing. Samuel leaned back. We can structure this as a charitable trust. You can retain the right to live in the house for the rest of your life, or you can sell it now and move. Upon your passing or upon the sale, the proceeds go to the foundation. I want them to know, I said. I don't want this to be a surprise they find after I'm gone. I want them to understand that their choices have consequences. Samuel nodded. We can make this very public. The Heart Health Alliance often does press releases for major estate donations. It helps with their fundraising. I like that. A public announcement for a public betrayal. We spent the next 2 hours drafting the new documents. I signed them with a hand that didn't shake. I felt a strange sense of peace as the notary stamped the final page. 45 years of being a doormat were erased with a few drops of black ink. I'll contact Sarah Jenkins at the Alliance, Samuel said as he walked me to the door. She handles their media and donor relations. She'll be thrilled. I went from Samuel's office directly to the Heart Health Alliance headquarters. Sarah Jenkins was a woman of high energy and genuine passion. When I told her my story, her eyes filled with tears. Arthur, this is incredible. Your gift will fund 2 new recovery centers. But more importantly, your story will highlight how vital family support is. People need to hear this. She called a contact at the local news station. By that afternoon, a news crew was scheduled to meet me at my house. I arrived home a few hours before the crew. Brandon was still in his pajamas, eating cereal over his keyboard. Margaret was on the phone with one of her friends, complaining about how tiresome it was going to be when I finally came home and started demanding things again. She didn't even look up when I walked into the kitchen. "Oh, you're back," she said, her voice dripping with boredom. "There's no food in the fridge. Brandon and I have been ordering out. You'll need to go to the store." I didn't say a word. I just went to my study and began clearing my desk. I moved their junk into the hallway, stacking it in a messy pile. "Hey, what are you doing?" Brandon shouted, appearing in the doorway. I was using those monitors. "They're mine," I said quietly. "Everything in this house is mine, and I'm reclaiming my space." "You're being a jerk, Arthur," Margaret said, standing behind Brandon. "You had a little surgery, and now you think you're a king? Get over yourself." I just smiled and kept working. At 5 p.m., a news van pulled into the driveway. "What is that?" Margaret asked, looking out the window. "Is there an accident?" "No," I said, walking toward the front door. "It's my interview." I met the reporter, a man named David, on the front lawn. The camera started rolling, and I told the truth. I told the city about the 47 seconds. I told them about the taxi. I told them about the stay another month text. I explained that I was donating the house and all my assets to the Heart Health Alliance because they actually understood the value of a heart. Margaret and Brandon were watching from the front window, their faces pressed against the glass. As David asked me why I was doing this, I looked directly into the lens. I realized that gratitude is an obligation. It's a choice. And for 45 years, I chose to give everything. Now, I'm choosing to give it to people who won't treat my life as an inconvenience. The interview aired on the 6 p.m. news. The fallout was immediate. Inside the house, it was like a bomb had gone off. Margaret was screaming that I was insane, that I couldn't give away her house. Brandon was frantically calling his friends, trying to find a place to stay, realizing that his free ride was coming to a very abrupt halt. My phone started blowing up. Margaret was calling me from the other room. Brandon was texting me from the hallway. I ignored all of it. I had received 67 calls and messages by 9 p.m. I didn't answer a single one. "You can't do this," Margaret yelled, storming into the guest room. "I'll sue you. I've been your wife for 45 years. And in all that time, you never learned who I was." I said, "The deed is in my name, Margaret. The accounts are in my name. The lawyer has already filed the trust. You have 24 hours to pack your things." 24 hours? Brandon shrieked from the door. "I have a tournament this weekend." "Then I suggest you start packing between rounds," I said. The next day was a whirlwind of chaos. I sat on the front porch with a cup of coffee, watching as they scrambled. Neighbors drove by slowly, their eyes wide. Some had seen the news and waved in support. Others looked away, embarrassed by the drama. Margaret was throwing her designer clothes into suitcases, sobbing about how cruel I was. Brandon was trying to fit his gaming chair into the back of his car, cursing every time it got stuck. They both kept trying to argue, to bargain, to plead. Brandon even tried to say he meant the Netflix comment as a joke. "I'm not laughing, Brandon," I told him. By 6 p.m., their cars were loaded. Margaret stood by the driver's side door, her face puffy and red. "You'll be alone, Arthur. No one will ever love you if you're this heartless." "I was already alone, Margaret," I said. "I just didn't have the peace to enjoy it. Now I do." They drove away. And for the first time in my life, the house was silent in a way that didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. The next few months were a revelation. I sold the big Scottsdale house. The proceeds went to Heart Health Alliance, and Sarah Jenkins kept me updated on the progress of the new centers. I bought a small, manageable apartment in a quiet part of the city. I also bought a brand new Harley-Davidson, the same model I'd wanted back in 1990. I started traveling. I went to Big Bend National Park and camped under the stars. I drove up to Sedona and hiked the Red Rocks, my heart beating strong and steady. I met a group of other retirees who traveled the country in RVs. I made friends who liked me for my stories and my humor, not for what I could do for them. I joined a photography club. I learned how to capture the desert sunset and the way the light hits the mountains at dawn. I sent my photos to Sarah at the foundation, and they use them in their newsletters to show other heart patients that life doesn't end after surgery. It begins. My health continued to improve. Dr. Sterling was amazed at my recovery. She told me I had the heart of a 50-year-old. I told her it was because I'd stopped carrying the weight of 3 people. One afternoon in June, I was sitting in a small coffee shop in downtown Phoenix, reviewing some photos on my tablet. A shadow fell over the table, and I looked up to see Brandon. He looked different. He wasn't wearing his usual stained hoodie. He was in a clean polo shirt and slacks. He looked like he'd lost weight, and his eyes weren't focused on a screen for once. "Dad," he said, his voice hesitant. "Can I sit?" I gestured to the chair. "What's on your mind, Brandon?" "I saw your photos in the Alliance newsletter," he said. "They're really good." "Thanks." "Look, I'm not here to ask for money," he said. And for the first time in his life, I actually believe him. I've been working. A real job. I'm doing data entry for a logistics firm. It's boring as hell, but it pays the rent on my studio apartment. I nodded, Waiting. She's struggling, he admitted. She's working as a receptionist at a dental office. She hates it. She spends most of her time complaining about you. But I think she's starting to realize she messed up. I know I did. Why are you telling me this? Because I didn't want the last time we spoke to be me shouting about a video game, Brandon said. I've been going to therapist. She asked me what I'd do if you really had died for more than 47 seconds. I realized I wouldn't have known anything about you, just that you were the guy who paid for stuff. He looked out the window. I'm sorry, Dad, for all of it, for the Netflix text, for the years of being a leech. I don't expect you to change a will or give me anything. I wanted to say it. I looked at my son. He finally looked like a man. It had taken losing everything to make him find himself. I appreciate you saying that, Brandon, I said, and I'm glad you're working. It's good for you. Can we maybe do this again? Just coffee? Once a month. I thought about it. I thought about the new life I'd built, the Harley in my garage, and the peace in my heart. Once a month sounds okay. But no talk about the past, and no talk about Margaret. Just you and me. Brandon smiled, and it was the first real smile I'd seen from him in a decade. I can do that. He left, and I went back to my photos. I felt a sense of completion. I had done what I set out to do. I had saved myself, and in a strange way, I had saved my son too by forcing him to grow up. I finished my coffee and walked out to my motorcycle. The Phoenix sun was warm on my back. I had a trip planned for the Grand Canyon next week, and the road was calling. I used to think that being a hero meant sacrificing everything for your family. I was wrong. Being a hero means having the courage to value your own life. It means knowing that you deserve to be more than 47 seconds away from being forgotten. I kicked the engine to life, the roar of the Harley echoing through the street. I didn't look back. I just headed toward the horizon, my heart beating steady and strong, ready for whatever the road had in store. Life is short, and sometimes it stops for 47 seconds just to remind you to start living. I'm Silas Thorne, and I'm finally alive. As I rode, I thought about the many people who might be listening to this story. I hope they realize that it's never too late to rewrite their own script. You don't have to wait for a heart attack to decide you're worth more than $12 socks. You don't have to wait for a stay another month text to decide you want to be home. The road ahead is long, and for the first time, I'm the one steering. No more yes dears, no more sure, Brandon. Just the wind, the road, and the sound of a heart that refused to stay stopped. I reached the edge of the city and pushed the bike a little faster. The desert opened up before me, vast and beautiful. I had no destination in mind, and that was the best part. For 45 years, I was driven by maps other people drew for me. Now, I'm making my own, and that, more than any house or any bank account, is the greatest inheritance I could ever leave behind. The knowledge that a life, once reclaimed, is a powerful thing to behold. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. I pulled over at a scenic overlook and took out my camera. I framed the shot, the winding road, the distant mountains, and the fading light. I took the picture, knowing it was perfect. I am Arthur Miller. I am a traveler, a photographer, and a man who knows the value of 47 seconds. My story isn't a tragedy. It's a triumph. And the best part is, it's only just beginning.